Hey guys. Tonight, we dive into one of the grimmer, yet oddly fascinating corners of Roman life. Public punishments that humiliated women by shaving their heads, stripping them bare, and parading them through the streets. Imagine the heavy, curious eyes of the crowd on you as you trudge through stone-paved forums under a blistering sun. Hair gone, dignity gone, exposed for all to gawk. Yeah, you probably won't survive this socially intact. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, where are you watching from? What's the local time now? Dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in a Roman provincial town, maybe Gaul or Judea, where the hum of daily life is interrupted by a sudden commotion. The air smells of dust and sweat, mixed with a metallic hint of anticipation. A woman, once a member of the community, is dragged into the open square. Her hair, her crowning glory, has been forcibly shorn, leaving her scalp bare to the sun and the jeers of the crowd. Stripped of her garments, she walks shivering under the weight of humiliation, each step echoing her fall from grace. This spectacle isn't random cruelty. It's an integral tool of Roman social control. In the vast expanse of the empire, maintaining order meant more than just laws on parchment. It demanded that deviance be visible, unmistakable. Public shaming was a language everyone understood. Hair, in Roman and broader Mediterranean culture, symbolized femininity, honor, and status. To remove it was to strip away those layers, exposing a raw vulnerability. Likewise, nudity in these punishments wasn't just about physical exposure. Clothes were identity markers. They signaled social class, virtue, and dignity. To parade naked was to publicly broadcast one's failure and disgrace. An irreversible social death sentence. The Romans were masters of spectacle, understanding that punishment was as much for the collective psyche as for the individual. Historical records, scattered and often pieced together from legal texts, writings of historians, and occasional inscriptions, show this wasn't isolated. Women accused of adultery, rebellion, or disrespect to Roman authority often face such rituals. The goal to warn others, to reassert power, and to publicly mark the boundaries of acceptable behavior. Now, remember that this wasn't uniform across the empire. Local customs mingled with Roman law, creating a patchwork of practices. But the core idea remained public humiliation. Using the body as canvas for shame was a tool wielded to maintain the fragile balance of order. Historians still argue whether these punishments were more symbolic theater or brutal, enduring torments. Some suggest the acts were swift and mostly performative. Others describe lingering trauma and social exile that could last a lifetime. But one thing's certain. Once you were paraded, your life was irrevocably changed. So buckle up as we stroll deeper into this uncomfortable, yet revealing, social drama of ancient Rome. You step closer now into the dusty halls of Roman jurisprudence, where laws shaped not just justice but social morality. The legal foundations for punishing women with shaved heads and public nakedness are deeply embedded in Roman law, especially around the strictures of female behavior. under the Lex Iulia de Adulteriis Coruscendis, introduced by Augustus around 18 BCE. Adultery was not just a private betrayal, but a public crime threatening the moral fabric of Rome. This law allowed husbands to punish their wives publicly, including the infamous head shaving and expulsion from the family home. The goal was to protect the sanctity of the family, the cornerstone of Roman society. But it wasn't just adultery. Women accused of inciting rebellion or defying imperial authority could also find themselves subjected to these humiliations. The law didn't just punish the act it aimed to erase the woman's social identity. The visible signs of punishment marked her as a warning beacon. The legal texts make chilling reading. While some sources mention fines or exile, others specify harsher, more visceral punishments. The fact that the Roman state sanctioned public head shaving and naked parading tells you how seriously they took female transgressions. The body became a billboard for shame. Interestingly, these laws weren't uniformly enforced. In some provinces, local governors might temper punishments. In others, they were executed with cold efficiency. The law granted magistrates discretion, often influenced by politics or social status. You can almost hear the murmur of Roman senators debating these laws. Was public shaming effective? Was it just? Should the state have the power to disgrace women so utterly? Some saw it as necessary. Others as excessively harsh. Fringe legal scholars have suggested that these punishments served a dual purpose: to control women, yes, but also to signal to the conquered peoples that Roman order was absolute. A naked, shorn woman walking through the streets was a message to everyone: resist. And this could be you. Historians still argue whether these laws reflected broader societal misogyny or pragmatic governance. Was the focus truly on protecting family honor? Or on suppressing female autonomy? The debate continues in academic circles. Meanwhile, these laws shaped daily life in ways no woman could ignore. The threat of public humiliation enforced silence, conformity, and fear, weaving itself tightly into the social fabric of the empire. So as you step back from the dusty legal scrolls, you sense the cold machinery behind the spectacle, the law not only punishing but scripting shame. Now, consider the rich symbolism behind hair and clothing in Roman culture. It's not just aesthetic, but deeply woven into identity and power. Shaving a woman's head was a potent act, charged with cultural meaning far beyond mere cleanliness. Hair represented a woman's honor, fertility, and status. Long, well-kept hair signaled virtue and marriageability. Removing it was like stripping her soul, a visual erasure of womanhood. The stark image of a shorn head was designed to shock and humiliate. Permanently marking a woman as disgraced, nudity in public was taboo, tied to vulnerability and shame. Clothes weren't just protection from the elements. They were armor in the social battlefield. Forcing a woman to walk naked was to tear away her social armor, exposing her to the judgmental eyes of society. This dual humiliation played on psychological layers. The physical pain of scalp irritation was minor compared to the mental torment of being publicly seen as less than. It stripped agency, reduced a person to a cautionary tale. In some fringe cultural beliefs, punished women were thought to carry curses or bad luck. Folk tales from provincial regions hint that shorn women could attract evil spirits or bring misfortune, adding a supernatural layer to the stigma. You can almost hear whispered fears among villagers that the humiliation wasn't just social, but cosmic. The rituals around hair removal might have had echoes of religious purification or sacrifice, turning punishment into a twisted ceremony. The act was more than punishment. It was transformation, often forced and cruel. Interestingly, some women resisted by covering their heads or clothing themselves in rags, attempting to reclaim some dignity. But these acts could invite harsher penalties, revealing the power imbalance. Historians still argue whether the symbolism was universally understood or varied by region and class. Did all Romans see head shaving as a mark of ultimate disgrace? Or did some interpret it differently in the local context? But one thing's clear, hair and clothes were far more than vanity. They were language. The empire spoke loudly through their removal. So next time you run your fingers through your hair or pull on your favorite sweater, remember, these simple acts were once battlegrounds of power and shame. Let's zoom in on some actual cases where women faced the terrifying fate of public humiliation for adultery. A crime taken deadly seriously in Rome. These stories, pieced together from scattered records, illuminate the brutal reality behind the laws and symbols. One famous case involved the wife of a Roman senator in the early imperial period. Accused of infidelity, she was condemned not just by her husband, but by the community. Her hair was cut short, an act that in some reports was described as shaving to the scalp, and she was paraded naked through the forum as a warning to all. The crowd jeered. Some spat, but the woman walked with as much dignity as she could muster, her fate sealed by law and custom. Another instance comes from the province of Judea, where local customs clashed with Roman law. A woman accused of adultery was publicly shamed, but with added religious overtones, her punishment was tied to both civic and religious laws, intensifying the spectacle. The blending of cultures added layers of complexity and suffering. In Gaul, evidence from graffiti and minor legal documents shows that similar punishments were meted out, though often the records are ambiguous, hinting at a wider but poorly documented practice. Some scholars suspect that provincial authorities used these punishments flexibly, sometimes to suppress political dissent disguised as moral outrage. Interestingly, there's at least one recorded instance where a woman's head was shaved, but she was allowed to keep her clothing. A nuance that might suggest a less severe punishment or a partial mercy. Such variations point to a spectrum of enforcement rather than a rigid script. Fringe historians have proposed that in some cases, these punishments were less about justice and more about spectacle, sometimes staged for entertainment during festivals or political displays. You can almost imagine the cynical smiles of officials, knowing the crowd's bloodlust and using it to consolidate power. Historians still argue whether these documented cases were exceptions or representative of a broader, harsher system. Were these punishments the rule or the exception? Did all accused women face such fate? Or only the unlucky, or politically vulnerable? The truth probably lies somewhere in between. A grim reality for some, a warning show for many. So as you picture those women walking the streets with shorn heads and exposed bodies, remember, they weren't just victims, but symbols. Living warnings carved into the collective memory of Rome. You move now across the sprawling map of the Roman Empire, from the bustling streets of Rome itself to the far-flung provinces where Roman authority mingled uneasily with local traditions. Public humiliations like head shaving and naked parading of women were far from uniform. Each region adapted the practice to fit local culture, law enforcement, and social norms. Take Gaul, for example, a province thick with Celtic roots but under Roman rule for centuries. Here, you'd find that Roman magistrates enforced punishments, but often with a degree of flexibility, the Gauls valued honor. But their social structures were different. Shaving a woman's head was still a mark of disgrace. But sometimes the event was more symbolic, a warning to the community rather than a full public spectacle. Archaeological findings, including graffiti and inscriptions, hint at women being punished for adultery or public scandal. But the records are patchy, leaving historians piecing together a fragmented picture. Shift to Judea, and things become more complicated. The Jewish population had their own strict codes of morality and justice. Roman authorities tread carefully, sometimes letting local customs dictate punishments. A woman accused of adultery in Judea might face not only Roman-imposed humiliation, but also religious censure from the Jewish community. This layering intensified the stigma. Public nakedness was particularly taboo, and shaving a woman's hair could be seen as a form of ritual defilement. Some sources describe that Roman soldiers would parade these women through the streets, but the exact details remain debated. In North Africa, the melting pot of Berber, Punic, and Roman cultures created yet another variation. Here, punishments could be brutal, but were sometimes tempered by local leaders' pragmatism. Public humiliation served as a social corrective, but also had to avoid alienating influential families or sparking rebellion. For instance, records show that in some coastal cities, the public parading of disgraced women included not just head shaving, but forced public apologies, emphasizing restoration rather than just punishment. These regional variations show that Roman imperial power was far from monolithic. Local governors and magistrates exercised discretion, balancing Rome's harsh moral codes with provincial realities. The core idea, public humiliation as a tool of control, remained, but its application was as diverse as the empire itself. Fringe scholars have suggested that some of these punishments were amplified or downplayed depending on political needs. In tense provinces, harsh spectacles served as deterrents against rebellion or dissent disguised as moral transgressions. Historians still argue about how widespread these practices really were outside Rome's urban centers. Was the spectacle of naked, shorn women a common sight? Or a fearsome rumor, whispered to keep order? What's clear, as you trace the empire's vast borders, is that the ritual of punishment adapted, survived, and served Rome's needs wherever its legions marched. Step into the boots of a Roman magistrate or soldier charged with enforcing these public punishments. The question is, who exactly made these spectacles happen? And what were their motivations? The answer reveals a complex mix of power, duty, and sometimes personal cruelty. Roman magistrates, often wealthy local elites, appointed or elected, held the legal authority to sentence and oversee punishments. Their role was to uphold not just the letter of the law, but the social order. Ordering a woman's head to be shaved or clothing stripped was a public declaration of her fall from grace, a way to assert control over community morals. For the magistrates, these acts reinforced their own authority, showing the people that justice was swift and visible. Soldiers, meanwhile, were often the physical enforcers, whether local garrison troops or imperial legions. They played a visible role in dragging the condemned woman through the streets. Their presence added an intimidating layer, reminding onlookers that Rome's military might underpin legal authority, but motivations were not always purely official. Some soldiers took cruel pleasure in their role, enjoying the power to humiliate. Ancient texts occasionally hint at abuses women further tormented or mocked by guards. The line between lawful punishment and personal vendetta sometimes blurred. Magistrates themselves might have personal or political reasons to order harsher punishments. In turbulent provinces, public spectacles sent clear messages to potential dissenters. Targeting women could be strategic, exploiting societal taboos to amplify shame. The crowds watching weren't passive either. Public punishments were, in a sense, communal rituals. Citizens might yell, throw insults, or even join in by pelting the punished with refuse. Participation reinforced social bonds and the idea of collective moral judgment. Yet, not everyone cheered. Some witnesses reportedly expressed sympathy or horror at the severity, especially when noble women or respected locals were involved. These mixed reactions complicated enforcement, sometimes leading to debates among local elites about the appropriateness of punishments. Fringe sources describe occasional moments where women were rescued or their sentences mitigated by influential advocates. Showing that power dynamics were fluid, historians still debate how much of these events were state-directed versus spontaneous expressions of popular anger. Was the crowd an unruly mob or a tool of imperial control? Regardless, the partnership of magistrates, zoljas, and citizens created a performative punishment, blending law, force, and social theater. So next time you see a trial scene in a movie, remember ancient Rome's justice was as much about spectacle as fairness. You find yourself in the thick of the crowd now, standing shoulder to shoulder with Romans from all walks of life, witnessing the brutal pageantry of public shaming, the square thrums with noise chants, insults, laughter, and occasional gasps, all swirling around the naked, shorn woman as she's paraded under the scorching sun. Public spectacles like these were more than punishments. They were communal events, a mix of justice and entertainment. Romans craved drama. The Forum was their theater. Watching the fall of someone, especially a woman stripped of dignity, satisfied a primal appetite for order and morality being restored. Crowds varied widely. Some were families hoping to reinforce social norms for their children. Others were neighbors eager for gossip. And some were political agitators seizing the moment to express broader grievances. The mix created a volatile atmosphere where the line between justice and cruelty blurred. The mood could swing wildly. At times, the crowd jeered loudly, throwing stones or shouting insults. Other moments brought eerie silence as the punished woman's humiliation sank in. You could hear whispered prayers or sympathetic murmurs. Especially if the woman was known or thought innocent, children sometimes mimicked the jeers, learning early lessons about morality and consequences. The event was a living classroom, teaching social boundaries through spectacle. Interestingly, some festivals or public holidays incorporated elements of public shaming, blending civic and religious rituals. This fusion added layers of meaning, making the punishment part of a larger, cosmic, or societal order, yet the crowd wasn't always unified. Conflicts sometimes broke out between supporters and opponents of the punishment. Local elites might defend the punished, while others called for harsher enforcement. These tensions revealed cracks in the social fabric beneath the surface of Roman order. Fringe accounts suggest that in some places, the crowd even helped orchestrate the punishment, choosing victims or escalating humiliation. In others, they resisted, protecting women or disrupting events. Historians still debate whether the crowd was more often a tool of oppression or a check against abuse. Did public shaming truly uphold justice? Or did it fuel cycles of violence and fear? Whatever the case, standing in that crowd would be an unforgettable experience, a mix of primal spectacle and harsh social lesson. So, next time you think of Roman public life as austere and orderly, remember the crowds roaring for spectacle and social control. Now, let's peel back another layer and examine how these public punishments revealed and reinforced gender and power dynamics in Roman society. The shorn heads and naked bodies weren't just punishments, they were messages about women's place in a patriarchal world. Women, in Rome, were subject to a strict code of conduct, their behavior tightly policed by family and state alike. Punishments like head shaving and public nakedness were ways to control female sexuality. Obedience and honor by humiliating women publicly, the male-dominated society reaffirmed its dominance and reminded women of their expected roles. Interestingly, these punishments were almost exclusively reserved for women. Men accused of similar crimes rarely face such visible shaming. Instead, they might be fined, exiled, or even executed. But public nakedness or head shaving was not the norm. This gender disparity reveals deep-seated beliefs about female honor being a public concern, while male transgressions were treated as private or political offenses. The spectacle of a naked, shorn woman was a powerful display of vulnerability and submission, designed to strip her of autonomy and reinforce male authority. It was not just punishment, it was domination. However, some women found ways to resist or subvert these power dynamics. Accounts of women who faced such punishments but maintained their dignity or even gained sympathy show cracks in the system. In rare cases, families or communities rallied to protect women or demand leniency, challenging patriarchal norms. Fringe feminist historians argue that these punishments were not just about morality, but tools to silence female voices and keep women in their place. The fear of public humiliation worked as a form of social control beyond the legal penalties. Historians still debate whether these punishments were primarily about controlling women's bodies or maintaining broader social order. Some suggest that women who threatened political or social stability through rebellion or influence were targeted under the guise of moral policing. Regardless, the public shaming rituals reveal how power, gender, and law intertwined in ancient Rome. So, as you ponder the shorn heads and naked parades, consider the invisible chains. They represent chains of power, fear, and gendered control shaping the empire's social landscape. You're stepping into a shadowy side of Roman public punishment now, where rumor and myth twist around the very real horrors faced by women shorn and stripped in the streets. Beyond the legal texts and official records, folk beliefs and fringe stories circulated, some suggesting these punished women were marked by curses, spiritual contamination, or supernatural wrath. In many provincial communities, especially those steeped in older, pre-Roman traditions, a woman paraded naked and with a shaved head became a figure of fear and fascination. Whispers told of her becoming an unwitting conduit for bad luck, misfortune, or even malevolent spirits. Some believed that such extreme public humiliation angered the gods, who might unleash plagues or disasters upon the town. Others thought the woman herself became cursed, her social death spilling over into supernatural exile. This intersection of social shame and supernatural fear created a powerful stigma, Families connected to such women often suffered second-hand reputational damage, leading to ostracism or economic hardship. Some households might even go to lengths to spiritually cleanse themselves after association with the punished woman, using rituals or charms borrowed from local pagan or emerging Christian practices. Fringe anthropologists note parallels with other ancient cultures, where shame and curses often went hand in hand, blurring the lines between social punishment and spiritual exile. The idea of pollution from a disgraced person was common, and in Roman provinces with diverse populations, these beliefs could meld in surprising ways. One particularly haunting rumor describes women who, after being paraded, wander the countryside as restless spirits, their shorn hair and naked forms visible as ghostly warnings. While there's no solid historical proof, such stories persisted for centuries, shaping local folklore long after the Roman era faded. Interestingly, in some Christian communities emerging at the empire's edges, these punishments took on new layers of meaning. The naked, shorn woman could be interpreted as a symbol of spiritual penitence or martyrdom, blurring punishment and redemption. Some fringe sects even revered these women as tragic saints, their suffering reflecting the hardships of faith. Historians still argue how much these supernatural associations influenced Roman practices versus being later folk additions. Did magistrates intend these spiritual consequences? Or were they incidental? Were such beliefs more common in rural areas than urban centers? Whatever the answers, the mixture of public humiliation with mystical dread added depth to these punishments, making them as much about cultural fear as legal retribution. So, as you imagine the shorn, naked woman in the square, think also of the whispered fears behind her, the shadows that followed her even after the crowd dispersed. You're now entering a lively, scholarly arena where historians fiercely debate the true nature and severity of these public humiliations. Were these punishments brutal, lasting scars on women's lives, or were they largely symbolic, theatrical events designed to enforce social norms without unnecessary cruelty? On one side, many historians emphasize the physical and psychological trauma endured by women forced into naked parades and head shaving. Contemporary accounts, though rare, describe the intense shame, possible physical pain from hair removal, and lasting social ostracism. The public nature of the punishment meant women could lose family support, economic standing, and personal safety. For some, the consequences were lifelong exile or worse. Yet, other scholars argue that many such punishments were swift and ritualized, more about spectacle than sustained torment. They point to legal records showing that punishments could be mitigated, or that women were sometimes quickly reintegrated into society after public shaming. In this view, the acts were symbolic reset buttons for social order, a public reassertion of control rather than a sentence to ruin. Adding complexity, some argue that the nature of the punishment depended heavily on social status. Noble women might face public humiliation but be shielded from physical harm, while commoners could endure harsher treatment. The performance of punishment was tailored to audience and context. Fringe scholars also explore the possibility that some public shaming events were staged or exaggerated, possibly for political propaganda. Powerful men could use accusations and public spectacle to eliminate rivals or enforce loyalty. The debate extends to whether the punishments reflected misogyny, pragmatic governance, or a combination. Did Roman society genuinely believe such public humiliations were justice? Or were they instruments of patriarchal oppression? Historians still argue about the frequency of these punishments. Were naked parades and head shavings routine for women accused of certain crimes? Or exceptional events? The paucity of detailed records leaves much to interpretation. This scholarly tussle reminds you that history is never simple. The harsh image of the shorn. Naked woman can represent multiple realities. Legal tool. Social theater. Political weapon. And cultural symbol. So, as you reflect on these debates, remember the human faces behind the history's women caught in a system both cruel and complex. Imagine the chilling significance of clothing confiscation as a form of social death in ancient Rome. Clothes were far more than fabric. They were woven into identity, status, and personal dignity. To forcibly remove a woman's garments in public was to strip away her social mask, exposing her not only physically, but metaphorically. In Roman society, clothing signaled everything: class, virtue, and respectability. The stola, for instance, was a garment reserved for respectable married women. Losing, it was akin to losing one's social standing. When a woman was stripped of her clothes and paraded naked, it announced to all that she had fallen irretrievably from grace. The act was sometimes accompanied by confiscation of personal belongings, further amplifying the sense of loss. Punished women became pariahs. Their visible nudity, a daily reminder of disgrace. This ritual of clothing removal was deeply humiliating, designed to maximize psychological torment. It was as if the punished woman's very existence was being erased in public view. The crowd's gaze intensified this effect, turning punishment into a communal condemnation. Interestingly, some texts mention that in certain cases, women were allowed to wear minimal coverings or to conceal themselves partially, suggesting a spectrum of enforcement. This could depend on local customs, the severity of the crime, or the influence of the woman's family. Fringe historians speculate that the ritual might also have roots in earlier, pre-Roman purification practices, where stripping symbolized casting off sin or impurity, yet in the Roman context, it was a tool of social control, not spiritual cleansing. Clothing removal was often staged at key public places, the Forum, near temples, or marketplaces where maximum eyes could witness the disgrace. Historians still debate whether the removal of clothing was always complete or sometimes symbolic. Was the goal to literally expose, or to mark the woman as socially bare while preserving some modesty regardless? The ritual sent an unmistakable message once shorn and naked. The woman was a living warning. Stripped of protection, dignity, and status. So next time you think about a simple dress or cloak, remember how, in ancient Rome, garments could mean the difference between honor and utter shame. You're now witnessing the ritual of head shaving as a rite of disgrace, a cruel ceremony transforming a woman's appearance and social identity in a single, humiliating act. In Roman culture, hair was a symbol of youth, beauty, and virtue. Shaving a woman's head was not just about removing hair, it was about erasing identity. The process was often public, carried out by a magistrate's order or soldiers, designed to be swift and unmistakable. Historical accounts describe hair being cut close to the scalp, leaving a stark and shocking image that lingered long after. The scalp, once covered in flowing locks, now revealed, could be sensitive and sore. A constant physical reminder of punishment. This ritual was also deeply symbolic. Hair represented social status and respectability. The loss marked a woman as dishonored and unworthy of normal social interactions. She was transformed from citizen to outcast. In some cases, the shaved head was associated with slavery or captivity. Adding further stigma, a shorn woman could be mistaken for a slave or a prisoner, amplifying her fall. The ritual could be accompanied by other symbolic acts, such as forcing the woman to wear coarse garments or to live outside the city limits, further alienating her. Interestingly, some fringe accounts link head shaving to religious or purification rites. In certain pagan ceremonies, hair removal symbolized shedding sin or preparing for a new spiritual phase, but in Roman punishment, this symbolism was twisted into a tool of degradation. Historians still debate the exact process. Was the hair removed in one swift shave, or gradually cut? Was it done by professionals or soldiers? These details vary by region and period. Some women resisted, hiding their hair or wearing scarves post-punishment to reclaim dignity. However, these acts could provoke harsher penalties, revealing the tight control over female appearance. The ritual of head shaving is a stark reminder that in ancient Rome, punishment wasn't just about law, but about controlling bodies, identities, and social narratives. So as you run your hands through your own hair, consider the weight of this ancient act, a brutal transformation etched into memory and society. You now glimpse how social status shaped the experience of punishment in Roman society. The shorn head and naked parade were not equal for all women. Noble women, commoners, and slaves faced varying fates. Influenced by power, wealth, and connections, noble women caught in scandal often faced public shaming. But with certain protections, their families might negotiate lighter punishments, preserving some dignity by allowing partial clothing or private hair removal. Records suggest some noble women were confined to their homes post-punishment rather than paraded publicly. This was a way to avoid scandal spreading uncontrollably while still enforcing social order. Yet, even with status, the stain of public humiliation could be devastating. The elite lived under intense scrutiny. A scandal could end marriages, alliances, and political careers. Some noble women chose exile or even suicide rather than face ongoing shame. Common women, with fewer resources, bore the brunt of public spectacle. Stripped naked, shaved, and marched through the streets. Their punishments were often brutal and fully public. Without family power to shield them, these women became visible warnings, their bodies politicized and exposed. Slaves and freed women occupied a different place. While they might be punished physically or legally, public, naked parading was rarer. Partly because slaves were already considered property with limited social status. Yet, some slaves, accused of crimes, might face similar humiliations. Blurring lines between social classes? Interestingly, some fringe texts suggest that slaves used the threat of public punishment as leverage in social negotiations, highlighting the complex dynamics of power and fear. Historians still debate how much status could protect women from the harshest punishments. Did wealth always buy leniency? Or could political intrigue override class? Were some noble women punished harshly as political scapegoats? These nuances reveal that public humiliation was a tool wielded unevenly, shaped by power as much as law. So as you picture a shorn, naked woman in the streets. Remember, her story depends as much on birthright as on alleged crime. A tragic intersection of law, class, and gender. You find yourself amid the swirling calculus of punishment as a deterrent, a grim mechanism. The Roman Empire wielded not only to chastise the guilty, but to warn the masses. The spectacle of a woman shorn of hair, stripped of garments, and paraded naked was far from private justice. It was a calculated broadcast of power and morality aimed at deterring others from stepping out of line. Deterrence in Roman legal culture functioned on multiple levels. The immediate act of public shaming served to instill fear, the primal, "Don't do this," or "This could be you" message. But it also fed into the collective psychology of the community, reaffirming social norms in a vivid, unforgettable way. The punishments turned women's bodies into public texts, coded warnings written in flesh and humiliation. The efficacy of these deterrents depended heavily on visibility. Town squares, marketplaces, and temple steps, places where citizens gathered, became the theaters of punishment. The more public and dramatic, the stronger the message. The noise of crowds, the jeers and gasps, amplified the ritual, turning shame into a communal experience. Historical accounts suggest the threat of such punishments restrained behaviors beyond the legal boundaries. Women, especially, were keenly aware of the consequences of stepping outside prescribed roles. In elite circles, the fear of losing reputation through such humiliations could be more powerful than physical penalties. Yet, deterrence wasn't without complexity. Fringe scholars note that the spectacle sometimes backfired. Crowds might sympathize with punished women or even ridicule the authorities, undermining the intended effect. The catharsis of public spectacle could lead to unrest or inspire subversion. Moreover, historians debate whether public humiliations effectively deterred crime or merely perpetuated cycles of fear and silence. Did these punishments prevent adultery or rebellion? Or did they foster resentment and secret defiance, in a practical sense? The Roman legal system balanced deterrence with mercy. There are records of women regaining status after punishment, especially if they performed public apologies or religious rites. This suggested that deterrence was coupled with a path to redemption, keeping social order flexible yet firm. So, as you imagine the shorn and naked woman walking that dusty street, think of her as both a punished individual and a living, warning the embodiment of Rome's attempt to control not just acts, but hearts and minds. You step inside the quiet, heavy space of a punished woman's mind, a realm of trauma, shame, and sometimes resistance that often went undocumented in the loud history of law and spectacle. The psychological impact of public humiliation in ancient Rome was profound and lasting. Being stripped naked in front of a crowd was a raw exposure, not just physically, but emotionally. The burning eyes of neighbors, friends, and strangers pierced through the skin, amplifying feelings of vulnerability and isolation. The shaved scalp, tender and exposed, was a constant reminder of disgrace every time the sun or wind touched it. For many women, this trauma extended far beyond the punishment itself. Families might shun them. Husbands could divorce or abandon them. And economic survival became precarious without social support. The loss of honor in Roman society could mean social death, severing ties that sustained identity and security. Yet, there were instances of remarkable resilience. Some women, despite the shame, sought to reclaim dignity through acts of penance, religious devotion, or reintegration efforts. Others found solidarity among similarly punished women or within sympathetic communities. These narratives, while rare, hint at complex human responses beneath the surface. Fringe psychological readings of these events suggest that public shaming operated as a form of social control by creating fear of exposure and ostracism, effectively policing behavior through internalized anxiety. Historians still debate how much these punishments resulted in long-term mental health consequences versus short-term social disruptions. The absence of direct records leaves much to conjecture, but the emotional weight is undeniable. Moreover, the cultural context shaped responses. In a society that placed immense value on honor and appearance, public humiliation was a weapon that cut deep, wounding not just pride, but survival chances. Some women resisted passivity. Stories survive of punished women who maintained silence in the face of jeers, or who returned to public life with defiant dignity, challenging the stigma. Others used the punishment as a tragic tool of political or familial maneuvering, highlighting the intersection of personal suffering and power struggles. So, as you picture the shorn, naked figure walking through jeering crowds, remember the unseen battles waged inside, between shame, survival, and resistance. You turn your gaze now to Roman literature and the arts windows into how shamed women were portrayed, often revealing society's anxieties, prejudices, and sometimes sympathies, from poets to playwrights. Roman writers grappled with the spectacle of punishment and its implications. In satirical works like those of Juvenal, shamed women appear as cautionary figures, embodiments of moral decay punished by public humiliation. Their nakedness and shorn hair become symbols of lost virtue and social chaos. The biting tone reflects elite anxieties about female behavior disrupting the patriarchal order. Conversely, some poets and novelists infuse their characters with pathos. Ovid, for example, explored themes of love, betrayal, and shame, sometimes humanizing women caught in scandal. Though not always depicting public punishments directly, these narratives hint at the emotional landscapes behind such events. Dramatic works staged in forums and theaters occasionally portrayed scenes of punishment, tapping into popular fascination and fear. These representations could serve both to reinforce norms and to provoke empathy, complicating simpler moral binaries. Visual art, while less explicit on the subject, occasionally depicts women in states of vulnerability, sometimes interpreted as references to public disgrace. Graffiti in Pompeii and Herculaneum includes crude drawings and inscriptions mocking or warning about infidelity and shame. Providing a raw glimpse of popular attitudes, fringe interpretations argue that these artistic portrayals helped shape public perceptions, creating a feedback loop where spectacle and narrative reinforced each other. Historians still debate how much literature mirrored reality versus idealized or exaggerated events. Was the shorn? Naked woman, a common figure in popular imagination, or a sensational motif used by elites? Regardless, Roman art and literature provide valuable context, showing that the spectacle of punishment was not just legal, but cultural, entwined with storytelling and social memory. So as you ponder those ancient verses and sketches, remember, they echo the complex dance of judgment, empathy, and control swirling around the fate of shamed women. You move into the spiritual realm, where religion and punishment intertwine in complicated ways, pagan beliefs and early Christianity influenced how public humiliations of women were understood and sometimes justified in Roman society. Pagan Rome held that honor and purity were not just social virtues, but divine mandates. Public shame, like head shaving and naked parading, could be seen as signs of divine wrath or cosmic imbalance. Some rituals intertwined with punishment, using humiliation to cleanse the individual and restore harmony to the community. Temples and priests might participate in or witness punishments, lending religious legitimacy to what were also legal acts. This fusion blurred lines between justice and sacrament. With the rise of Christianity, new interpretations emerged. Early Christians sometimes saw nakedness and suffering as spiritual trials or paths to redemption. The figure of the shorn. Naked woman could be recast as a symbol of penitence, humility, or martyrdom, complicating traditional stigma. Some Christian texts condemned public humiliation as unjust cruelty, advocating compassion and forgiveness. While others reinforced moral strictness, the tension between these views reflected broader societal shifts. Fringe scholars argue that Christian influence gradually softened some harsh punishments or introduced new rituals of reconciliation. Historians still debate how deeply religious beliefs shaped the legal and social treatment of punished women. Did spiritual interpretations amplify or mitigate public humiliation? Were religious leaders complicit or resistant? The answer varies by region and era, reflecting Rome's evolving religious landscape. So, as you contemplate those naked, shorn figures, I think also of the spiritual narratives that envelop them, stories of sin, suffering, and sometimes hope. You find yourself weighing the scales of gendered justice in Rome. The stark contrast between punishments meted out to men and women reveals a society deeply invested in controlling female bodies and honor more visibly and severely. Men accused of crimes like adultery, rebellion, or disrespect rarely faced public nakedness or head shaving. Instead, their punishments tended toward exile, fines, or even execution, often conducted behind closed doors or with a degree of privacy. Their social identities were less publicly stripped. Women, conversely, bore the burden of visible, corporeal shaming. Their bodies became public canvases for disgrace, reinforcing a double standard where female morality was policed through humiliation and male transgressions through legal or physical penalties. This gendered disparity served to reinforce patriarchal control, ensuring that women's sexuality and behavior were monitored publicly while men's were managed privately or politically. Interestingly, in cases where men were disgraced, rumors or literary accounts sometimes hinted at symbolic emasculation rather than physical nakedness, suggesting that visible humiliation took different forms for each gender. Fringe historians argue that this asymmetry extended beyond punishment to daily life, shaping gender relations and expectations across the empire. Historians still debate the extent to which these practices reflected misogyny versus pragmatic governance. Was public female humiliation a necessary social tool or a reflection of deep-seated gender biases? Whatever the answer, the unequal treatment highlights how Roman society saw control of women as essential to maintaining order. So, as you reflect on the stark nakedness and shorn heads, I think also of the invisible lines drawn around bodies, lines that marked power, gender, and justice in ancient Rome. You're stepping into the brutal chaos of wartime Rome, where the usual rules bend and sometimes break under the harsh realities of conflict. Women caught up in military campaigns, especially those accused of transgressions, faced punishments that could be even more severe than peacetime humiliations. In wartime, enemy women, whether captured civilians or rebels, were often treated with a cruel mixture of strategic punishment and symbolic domination. Shaving heads and stripping clothing became acts of war, tools for asserting Roman dominance and humiliating the defeated procensor. The public nature of these punishments sent clear messages. Conquerors wield power not just through weapons, but by controlling bodies and honor. Such practices were common in sieges or after suppressing rebellions. Women paraded naked and shorn were displayed as trophies of victory, their suffering a warning to other enemies. The Roman army, known for its discipline and brutality, saw these punishments as extensions of military might. The psychological impact was immense. Not only did it terrorize enemy populations, but it also reinforced cohesion within Roman ranks. Soldiers could witness visible signs of victory and control, boosting morale. However, the treatment of women in war was not uniformly brutal. Some commanders exercised restraint, understanding that excessive cruelty could provoke further resistance or damage Rome's reputation. Fringe historians suggest that, in some cases, these punishments were staged for propaganda, exaggerating atrocities to intimidate foes or glorify Roman conquest. Historians still debate whether wartime humiliations of women were systematic policy or ad hoc acts of cruelty. The gap between official military codes and battlefield realities remains murky. Moreover, the gendered nature of punishment was stark. Enemy men might be executed or enslaved, but women's bodies became the battleground for symbolic conquest. So, as you imagine the dust and chaos of ancient wars, picture these women stripped, shorn, paraded, a living testament to the empire's ruthless assertion of power. You now feel the weight of family honor in ancient Rome, a concept as precious as life itself, yet fragile as glass. When a woman was punished, publicly shorn, naked, and humiliated, her family's reputation bore the shockwaves, often with devastating consequences. In a society where family lineage and public standing dictated social and political power, a woman's disgrace could tarnish the entire household. The stain of public punishment was not isolated. It rippled through generations, affecting marriage prospects, business dealings, and political alliances. Fathers, husbands, and brothers faced public scrutiny alongside the woman. Some tried to protect their kin fiercely, while others might distance themselves to preserve their own honor. In extreme cases, families disowned the punished woman, casting her out as a pariah. Yet, family honor could also be a double-edged sword. Some men exploited a woman's public disgrace to assert dominance or eliminate rivals within familial politics. Punishments became tools in power struggles. Interestingly, some families went to great lengths to rehabilitate the shamed woman's reputation, arranging public apologies, religious ceremonies, or marriages to restore honor. These acts underscored the importance of social redemption. Fringe historians note that the collective impact of punishment on family networks made public humiliation a powerful political weapon, extending beyond individual guilt. Historians still debate how families balance shame and loyalty. Were women truly abandoned? Or did private networks provide refuge? The answer varies by region, class, and era. This web of honor and shame reveals that public punishments targeted not just bodies, but social bonds, weaponizing family ties to enforce conformity. So, as you picture a woman's bare, shorn form in the square, remember, she carries not only personal shame, but the heavy burden of family legacy. You are witnessing moments of fragile hope amid the harsh realities of public shaming, the opportunities for apology, redemption, and reintegration that sometimes followed even the harshest punishments. Ancient Roman society, while stern, was not wholly unforgiving. Legal and social frameworks allowed for paths back from disgrace, especially when a woman demonstrated repentance or received community support. Public apologies were common, often staged in temples or forums. Women might kneel, beg forgiveness from their families or communities, or perform acts of penance. These rituals were as much about restoring social harmony as about personal contrition. Religious ceremonies also played a role. Sacrifices or purification rites could symbolically cleanse the woman's shame, signaling to the community her renewed status. Family intervention was crucial. Influential kin could advocate on her behalf, negotiating reductions in punishment or facilitating social acceptance. In some cases, women who endured public humiliation went on to lead respectable lives. Though often marked by the lingering memory of their punishment, fringe sources describe cases where public forgiveness became theatrical events, reinforcing communal bonds and moral order. Historians still debate how often redemption succeeded and what factors influenced it. Did class, politics, or gender dynamics determine who could return from disgrace? This tension between punishment and mercy illustrates Rome's complex approach to justice, a balance of harshness and pragmatism. So, as you imagine the shorn and naked woman later offering public apology, remember, this was not always the end, but sometimes a painful new beginning. You now trace the echoes of Roman public humiliations deep into the legal traditions of medieval and later Europe, where the scars of naked parades and head shaving persisted in law and custom. Medieval legal codes, especially those dealing with morality and family honor, retained echoes of Roman punishments. Head shaving, for instance, was used as a sign of penance or shame in cases of adultery or heresy, often enforced by church authorities. Public exposure, including forced nudity or partial disrobing, was similarly used as a form of communal punishment, designed to shame offenders and warn others. Stocks, pillories, and other devices extended the tradition of visible punishment. These practices, while evolving, carried the same core logic. Social order was maintained through public spectacle and humiliation. In some regions, the church adapted Roman motifs, using rituals of public penance that echoed ancient humiliations but framed in spiritual terms. Fringe historians note that folklore and oral traditions preserved memories of shorn, naked figures as symbols of sin and punishment well into early modern periods. Historians still debate how directly medieval punishments descended from Roman practices versus independently arising customs. Nevertheless, the legacy is clear. The power of public humiliation as a social tool endured across centuries. So, as you walk through medieval town squares, you might still sense the faint shadows of Rome shorn. Naked women, ghosts of social control across time. You're now comparing Roman public punishments with those of neighboring and contemporaneous cultures, revealing both shared customs and unique twists in the policing of female honor. In ancient Greece, Public shaming of women for adultery also existed, but was less ritualized as head shaving and naked parading. Exile or fines were more common. Though humiliation remained a tool, Egyptian customs sometimes included shaving heads as symbolic purification or mourning, but not necessarily as a public punishment. In the Near East, cultures like the Assyrians employed harsh physical punishments for women, sometimes including public exposure, but the exact rituals differed from Roman spectacles. Celtic tribes in Gaul had their own codes, often more communal and oral in nature, but could involve public shaming in various forms. Fringe scholars argue that Roman practices absorbed and adapted elements from these neighboring traditions, creating a hybrid of legal and cultural enforcement. Historians still discuss whether Roman punishments were innovations or part of broader Mediterranean social control patterns. The variations highlight the importance of local context in shaping how female morality was policed and punished. So, as you contemplate Roman women paraded naked and shorn, remember they were part of a wider ancient conversation about gender, power, and shame. You find yourself wandering the calendar of ancient Rome, where punishment rituals sometimes intersected with festivals and religious observances, weaving shame into the fabric of communal life. Public humiliations like head shaving and naked parading were occasionally tied to specific times of year, adding ritual significance and amplifying their social impact. One notable example involves the festival of Lupercalia, celebrated every February, which combined purification rites with fertility blessings. During this carnival-like event, traditional social norms were temporarily loosened, allowing behaviors that were normally taboo. Fringe theories propose that some public shaming punishments were deliberately scheduled near such festivals, using the charged atmosphere to heighten moral lessons. Similarly, the Saturnalia, a December festival of role reversals and social license, might have featured controlled humiliations or parodies of justice as part of its temporary subversion of order. Punishments enacted during these times could blend real discipline with symbolic theatricality, serving both as moral warnings and as part of ritual renewal. Some provincial towns incorporated local festivals where humiliations were public spectacles, doubling as communal catharsis, reinforcing social cohesion through shared experiences of justice and atonement. Historians still debate the extent to which these festivals influenced punishment, timing, and style. Were shorn naked parades coordinated with religious calendars to maximize effect? Or were connections incidental? The evidence is fragmentary but intriguing. In any case, embedding punishment within religious or festival cycles underscores how Roman justice wasn't merely legal, but deeply cultural and symbolic. So, as you imagine the grim procession through sunlit forums, picture the echo of drums and incense, punishment and prayer entwined in an ancient dance of control and renewal. You now delve into the precarious lives of slaves and freedwomen within the web of public punishment, exploring how status shaped vulnerability and agency in Roman society. Slaves, already considered property with limited legal rights, often faced harsh physical punishments but rarely public naked parades or head-shaving practices typically reserved for citizens or freed persons. However, slaves accused of grave offenses could suffer humiliation, designed to mark them as untrustworthy or dangerous. Freed women, having transitioned from slavery to limited freedom, okcupiet, agreizone, their social standing was ambiguous, making them frequent targets of public shaming rituals. A freed woman accused of adultery or insubordination might be subjected to humiliations akin to those of citizen women, including head shaving and public exposure. The threat of such punishment reinforced social hierarchies, reminding freed women of their precarious status and the limits of their acceptance. Interestingly, some freed women wielded surprising influence, leveraging social connections or wealth to resist or mitigate punishments. Their experiences reveal complex negotiations between agency and oppression. Fringe studies suggest that in some cases, slaves used the fear of public shaming against freed women as a way to assert informal power, highlighting subtle social tensions within female hierarchies. Historians still debate how widespread and systematic public humiliations were for slaves and freed women due to sparse records. This focus on status within gendered punishment illuminates how Roman justice operated along intersecting lines of class, gender, and power. So as you envision the shorn and naked figures, remember their stories vary widely. Some powerless victims, others shrewd survivors, navigating a harsh social landscape. You step into the colorful and often crude world of Roman visual art and graffiti, where shamed women occasionally appear as subjects, offering vivid snapshots of public attitudes toward punishment. Pompeii's graffiti walls, for instance, reveal a raw, unfiltered popular voice, insults, warnings, and caricatures often targeted women accused of infidelity or loose morals. Sketches sometimes depict naked female figures or women with exaggerated hairstyles, interpreted as references to public humiliation practices. Mosaic art and frescoes occasionally include scenes that scholars debate as symbolic representations of shame or virtue. While not always explicit, these images provide insight into the cultural imagination surrounding punishment. More formal sculptures rarely portrayed such humiliations directly, but some reliefs and votive offerings hint at themes of chastity, honor, and restoration. Reflecting societal values tied to female behavior, fringe art historians propose that some marginal illustrations in manuscripts, created centuries later, but rooted in Roman traditions, used imagery of shorn, naked women to convey moral lessons. These visual artifacts complement literary and legal sources, revealing how punishment was not only enacted, but remembered and interpreted. Historians still debate how literal or symbolic these depictions are. Were they documentation, satire, or moral instruction? The art adds texture to understanding the lived experience of punishment, showing how society negotiated shame visually as well as legally. So as you imagine those naked, shorn women, picture them immortalized in rough sketches on tavern walls, voices of ordinary Romans echoing through time. You now traverse the divide between urban and rural in the Roman world, where the practice and impact of public punishment took on differing shapes and meanings. In the bustling cities, forums and marketplaces thrummed with spectators and officials. Here, public humiliations were grand spectacles, carefully staged events reinforcing urban social hierarchies. The crowded spaces amplified shame, and the presence of magistrates, priests, and soldiers underscored authority. Urban settings offered infrastructure platforms, temples, and statues against which punishments could be enacted and witnessed, ensuring maximum visibility. The diverse populations meant that such spectacles resonated widely. In contrast, rural areas saw more varied practices. Villages might conduct punishments in smaller gatherings, less formal but no less impactful, without the grandeur of the city. Humiliation was often more intimate, involving local kinship groups and community elders. Sometimes, rural punishments leaned more on gossip, ostracism, and informal sanctions than on public parading. The smaller social circles meant shame could be more pervasive, but also harder to escape. Fringe anthropologists note that rural communities sometimes integrated older, pre-Roman customs into punishment rituals, blending shame with spiritual or magical elements. Historians still debate how punishment's visibility affected its efficacy. Did urban spectacles foster stronger deterrence? Or did rural communities rely on more persistent social pressures? This urban-rural contrast reveals the flexibility and complexity of Roman justice, adapting to context while maintaining core themes of control. So, as you picture shorn, naked women walking city streets or quiet village paths, consider how place shaped not just punishment, but experience and memory. You now step into the delicate, often fraught moments of resistance and protest against the harsh realities of public humiliation. Despite the overwhelming power wielded by Roman authorities, history preserves whispers of women and communities pushing back against the spectacle of punishment, revealing cracks in the armor of control. Some women refuse to submit passively to their fate. Accounts, though scarce, tell of shorn and naked women who met their punishment with silent dignity, refusing to show fear or shame. This quiet defiance sometimes moved crowds, eliciting sympathy rather than scorn, subtly undermining the intended humiliation. In other instances, family members or local communities protested the severity or injustice of punishments, appealing to magistrates for leniency or intervening to protect the women. These acts revealed that the spectacle was not universally accepted, rather, it was contested terrain. Fringe sources describe rare cases where crowds disrupted punishments, shielding the accused or demanding clemency, highlighting tensions between popular will and official decree. Such resistance complicated the performance of power. Authorities had to balance enforcing order with maintaining public support, often navigating a fine line. Historians still debate how widespread and effective these acts of protest were. Were they exceptional or more common than records suggest? Did resistance lead to policy changes or harsher crackdowns? The legacy of these moments is profound, reminding us that even in oppressive systems, agency and solidarity flicker, challenging narratives of total domination. So, as you imagine the stark procession through dusty streets, picture the quiet courage and occasional outcry that ripple beneath, humanizing an otherwise bleak scene. You reach the reflective space of legacy and memory, where the shorn heads and naked bodies of punished women cast long shadows on Roman cultural consciousness and beyond. Public humiliations, brutal as they were, became woven into the collective memory through stories, literature, and oral tradition. These images served as moral lessons, warnings, and symbols of the consequences of transgression. In some cases, punished women were remembered as tragic figures, victims of harsh laws or political intrigue. Their stories were recounted with varying tones, cautionary, empathetic, or even subversive. Graffiti, inscriptions, and folk tales kept alive memories of these humiliations, often with a mix of humor, horror, and moralizing. The cultural imprint extended into later periods, influencing medieval and Renaissance ideas about shame, penance, and gender roles. Fringe cultural historians argue that the symbolic power of nakedness and head shaving as tools of social control persists even today. embedded in rituals of shame and ostracism worldwide, historians still explore how memory of these punishments shaped societal attitudes toward women, honor, and justice across centuries. So as you ponder the silent echo of those public punishments, no, they resonate far beyond their dusty Roman streets, shaping narratives of power and shame through time. You now stand at the close of this journey, reflecting on what these harsh punishments teach us about human dignity, power, and control in ancient Rome, and perhaps ourselves. The image of a woman, shorn of hair, stripped bare, and marched through the public eye is stark, painful, and unsettling. Yet, it reveals deep truths about how societies use visibility to enforce conformity, how bodies become battlegrounds for honor and authority. These punishments were not random cruelty, but calculated acts, tools wielded by an empire striving to maintain order across vast, diverse populations. They intertwined law, spectacle, gender, and religion into complex rituals of power. You might feel discomfort or sadness at the stories of trauma and humiliation. Remember, these were real people, caught in systems beyond their control. At the same time, traces of resilience, resistance, and redemption thread through the narrative, reminding us of human strength amid adversity. This history, layered and complicated, invites reflection on the costs of social control, the fragility of dignity, and the ways communities negotiate power. So as the sun sets on our tale, let the fading echoes of the shorn and naked remind you that history is not just about events, but about the lives lived and sometimes lost within them. Now, dim the lights further, breathe deeply, and let these reflections settle into the soft hush of night.